We'll turn it over.
Well, thank you so much for letting me be here tonight. I see there's a lot more people than I thought. Brett said to be a small gathering, and so I was prepared for that, but the screen is kind of filled here. So I'm so happy to see a lot of you that I know and some of you that I don't know that well. But I'm hoping that in the next little while that we'll get to know each other a little bit better through what we know about Abdu'l-Baha and why he has brought us together. Some of us are Baha'is and some of us are learning about the faith, and some of us are friends of the Baha'is, and we're all sort of in a learning mode about this faith and trying to understand things. Like, Abdu'l-Baha was referred to as the mystery of God, and I'm not going to be in any way be able to explain what this mystery is about, but I will try to do a little bit of something about what my understanding is about Abdu'l-Baha and how he's affected my life a little bit, and I'm sure has affected all of our lives to a large extent. The first thing that comes to my mind about Abdu'l-Baha, about how he really sort of challenged everything that we've thought. In fact, the Baha'i Faith itself is a big challenge for many people in the world, because what it's done and what Baha'u'llah did when he came, he really kind of disturbed people because he said, there would be new teachings for a new day. And for a lot of people, the idea of new teachings are not pleasant for them, because that was going to mean a big change in the world and a big change in maybe their personal life, their collective life, their political life. All life would be changed by what Baha'u'llah said. And as some of us know as Baha'is, the reception to his teachings in Persia in those days, to some extent, even present day, has not been well received. Because Baha'u'llah said things that were very disturbing to people. He would say things like, well, we live in a world now that's got a whole bunch of countries, but he said, the earth is one country and mankind is citizens. That doesn't resonate too well for people that like the idea of a country, and particularly if there's one country versus another country. What do you do with the idea that the earth is one country now? What happens with that whole concept of the world, where we have a world of countries and Baha'u'llah says the earth is one country? Now, remember, this is over 170 years ago that he brought these teachings, and this is in the middle of Persia in the middle part of the 1800s. And Abdu'l-Baha, you see, was his son, and he grew up with these teachings of his father, Baha'u'llah. And of course, so he learned, if you want, from the voice of the messenger of God all of his life. And he was loved by his father and his mother so much. But so he grew up in a life of discovery of new teachings and new ideas. And his father was the voice of this because he was the messenger of God. So one can imagine what that would have been like. Well, it's hard to imagine. But the life was not an easy life, as we know from the Baha'i teachings and from the history of the faith, because when Baha'u'llah brought these teachings to the world, the resistance was palpable. And the family got exiled, and they went from Iran, from Tehran to Baghdad, and then from Constantinople to Adrianople, and then finally were put in prison in Akka. And so Abdu'l-Baha, his whole life as a child and then as an adult, and then before he passed away, was a life of incarceration, a life in which people found the teachings of Baha'u'llah disturbing. Some were loving them, some were not loving them. But it was the beginning of a whole new time in the history of the world. A civilization was going to be starting to develop, which we had never imagined before. And we still have no idea of imagining what it is. You remember Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, in World Order Letters, and I can just paraphrase this, but he says something to this extent, and I think it's on page 33 or sort of 35. He says, all we can reasonably venture to attempt is to strive to see the first glimpse of the promised dawn. Well, I mean, he said it much more eloquently than that, because I don't have the exact words in front of me, but that's what I remember. So none of us can imagine what Baha'u'llah has unleashed into the world. And no one can imagine what the future holds for the world, except that it's extraordinarily exciting and wonderful, the future of humankind. We can imagine, because Baha'u'llah has promised us that this is the day of the fulfillment of all the great world religions, in which Baha'u'llah says that the progression of civilization will unfold, and basically the promise, if you want, kingdom of God on earth would be established. Now, of course, none of us will have any idea of what that looks like, but the future of the world is extraordinary. And I think if Baha'is have anything we can share with the peoples of the world, is not just the notion of that we're going through change, but that the change is exciting, and we're destined to have a world quite different than we've ever seen in the past and can even imagine in the present. So I wanted to just ask you to consider a few things. When Abdu'l-Baha was finally released from prison as an older man, and was finally able to leave the Holy Land, there were a few Baha'is in North America. There already had been some who had visited him in the Holy Land. And of course, the Baha'i community around the world had started to grow with the teachings of Baha'u'llah and with the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha. Because when Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892, he had appointed Abdu'l-Baha, his son, to be that center that we would all turn to. That Abdu'l-Baha would be this vessel, this personage that would be able to be an example to us as what a Baha'i should be like. So when we hear the word sometimes, and we've quoted this, I'm sure, and now the Baha says, look at me, be like me, follow me, and so forth. You see, the notion would be that we would look at Abdu'l-Baha and say, now there is a Baha'i. That's the way we're supposed to be. That's the way we should behave. And in the history of the world, there has never, ever been an Abdu'l-Baha. There has never been somebody that could exemplify the teachings of the messenger. Some of us have come from a Christian background. There was nobody who could exemplify the teachings of Jesus Christ. There was nobody who could exemplify the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. There has never been in the history of the world a personage, a figure that would say, well, now there is an example of what the faith is about. And we look at Abdu'l-Baha and we say, that's the person. This is the person who is an evidence of what the greatness of the faith is all about. This is what it means to be a human being, a real human being, a really inspired human being. This is the promise of what humanity can become like. Never, of course, like Abdu'l-Baha completely, but that's the pathway to follow. Now, let me ask you to consider something. When Abdu'l-Baha was teaching, and of course the Baha'is then, and even to this day, had probably limited understanding about what the faith was about. And when he came to North America, there was a handful of Baha'is, and most of them would have come from a Christian background. And they were confused about who Abdu'l-Baha. They loved him, but even the idea that maybe he was like the son and the father was Baha'u'llah, they were trying to figure out who this soul was. Who was this Abdu'l-Baha? And why was he so special? And why were people so attracted to him? And they would hear his words and they just couldn't bear not to be with him. And when he finally left and went back after 239 days of traveling in North America, people were crying, and it was sadness because they knew that they would not see him again. But when he got back to the Holy Land, he wrote back and forth to the friends in North America constantly. And I'm always thinking, we have email now. We can sort of write people every day. And of course, it's usually useless information we're sharing. But Abdu'l-Baha wrote extraordinary things to people in North America. And I want you to listen to I'm going to read something to you that he wrote. And this was just the year that he would have passed on in 1921. He would have written this. That was 100 years ago. And we're just looking right now at the commemorating the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha in just in a week or so. So let me read you this. He received this letter from probably a woman, because women are great at asking questions. I don't know why men didn't do anything, but thank God for the women that they would write Abdu'l-Baha and then he would write them back. And someone said to Abdu'l-Baha, I think this was the Pilgrim's note, why do you write to so many women? He said, because I just answer my mail. They were writing him all the time. And I say, thank God for that, because without the women, maybe we wouldn't have had a lot of the guidance that we received. But they did, and we did, and here we have it. So here's a letter that he wrote to this, I assume it's a woman. And he says, oh, and this is, oh, thou who dost search after truth. Thy letter of the 13th of December, 1920 hath come. Now, I don't know how long that took to get the letter, but I would imagine it was in 1921, because if the letter was December the 13th, 1920, knowing the mail, I mean, I know it now, it takes sometimes 2 weeks to get a letter, just from New York City to here. So it probably took a while to get it to the Holy Land, but it doesn't matter. The point is that he answered the letter. And then this person was probably trying to figure out what the heck this Baha'i faith is really about. Like, what is this notion of progressive revelation? What does it mean to have all these great world religions? And how do we figure this one out? And so he said this. He says, from the days of Adam until today, the religions of God have been manifest, one following the other. Now think of that. Isn't that the first indication of progressive revelation? One following the other. And each one of them fulfilled its due function. So again, he's saying, well, they followed each other and they had a purpose and a function and they followed it and the guidance was given. He said, and each one of them fulfilled its due function, revived mankind and provided education and enlightenment. They freed the people, he said, from the darkness of the world of nature and ushered them into the brightness of the kingdom. So, I mean, this is extraordinary. Imagine he's telling us about progressive revelation in 3 sentences, that everything that God has done to us has provided for us what we needed. He gave us enlightenment. He gave us guidance. He freed the people from darkness. I mean, it's extraordinary. And then he goes on to say, as each succeeding faith and law became revealed, it remained for some centuries a richly fruitful tree. And to it was committed the happiness of humankind. So, I mean, isn't this a beautiful, this is like one little paragraph about progressive revelation to this lady, probably. And she got the letter. And then she says, however, as the centuries rolled by, it aged, it flourished no more and put forth no fruit. Wherefore was it then made young again? And then he goes on to say this, the religion of God is one religion. Now that's the 7 sentences and he's given you progressive revelation. Now he said, religion is one. And then he goes on to say this, Moses, for example, was set forth to man and he established the law, and the children of Israel through the Mosaic law were delivered out of their ignorance and came into the light. They were lifted up from their abjectness and attained to a glory that fadeth not. Still, as the long years wore on, that radiance passed by. That splendor set, that bright day turned into night. And once the night grew triply dark, the star of the Messiah dawned, so that again a glory lit the world. See how he links it together? Moses, now Christ. And then he says, now our meaning is this, that religion of God is one and is the educator of humankind, but still it needs to be made new. When thou dost plant a tree, its height increases day by day. It putteth forth blossoms and leaves and luscious fruits, but after a long time, it doth grow old, yielding no fruitage any more. Then Does the husbandman of truth take up the seed from the same tree and plant it in a pure soil? And lo, there standeth the first tree, even as it was before. Isn't that beautiful? The same tree, but now it's in a different and it's new. It's the same religion, but it's renewed. And he says, note, though, carefully, that in this world of being, all things must ever be made new. Look at the material world. And he said, look about see how it hath now been renewed. The thoughts have changed. The ways of life have been revised. The sciences and arts show new vigor. Discoveries and inventions are new. Perceptions are new. How then could such a vital power as religion, the guarantor of humankind's great advances, the very means of attaining everlasting life, the foster of infinite excellence, the light of both worlds, not be made new? So he's asking the question, if everything else is made new, why shouldn't religion be made new? See? This would be incompatible, he said, with the grace and the loving kindness of the Lord. Now, to me, this is like extraordinary, because he's saying to us, if religion is not renewed, then this would not be, God would not be ever loving and kind to us. But he is. So he has renewed religion for us. He's given us new ideas, new concepts. And then he goes on to say this, and this is the kind of the summary of it. He says, religion, moreover, is not a series of beliefs, a set of customs. Religion is the teachings of the Lord God, teachings which constitute the very life of humankind, which urge high thoughts upon the mind, refine the character, and lay the groundwork for man's everlasting honor. Then he asks a question. He says, note thou, could these fevers in the world and of the mind, these fires of war and hate, of resentment and malice among the nations, this aggression of peoples against peoples, which has destroyed the tranquility of the whole world, ever be made to abate except through the living waters of the teachings of God? And then he says, no, never. Okay? Now just get that. See, it's not going to be a political thing that's going to arrive at a better world. He said, these fevers of the world, fires of war and hate, resentment and malice against the nations, aggressions of peoples against peoples, which have destroyed they'll never be made to abate except through the living waters of the teachings of God. And then he goes on to say this, and this is clear, he says. So it's clear. He says, a power above and beyond the powers of nature must needs be brought to bear to change this black darkness into light, and these hatreds and resentments, these grudges and spites, these endless wrangles and wars into fellowship and love amongst all the peoples of the earth. This power, Abdu'l-Baha says, is none other than the breathings of the Holy Spirit and the mighty inflow of the Word of God. Okay. Now, folks, some lady got this letter, and now you've heard it. And I'm so glad that she wrote the question. And the question was, I'm looking for the truth. And he writes back this extraordinary letter to her. And now we have it in the selection of the writings of Abdu'l-Baha. So I wanted to read that to you. I know it was a long letter, but it's in this, considering the world today, it's pretty good to hear this information. Because what he is saying in this and what we're learning from Abdu'l-Baha, because he was taking the teachings of Baha'u'llah and he was now sharing this with the peoples of the world. This is what Baha'u'llah meant when he talked about progressive revelation. He talked about the oneness of God. He talked about we are all the leaves of one tree, the waves of one ocean. Abdu'l-Baha was explaining to the people what Baha'u'llah's intent was and meaning was. He was to explain the great revelation of Baha'u'llah to us. when I first became a Baha'i a long time ago, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, but I had real trouble reading Baha'u'llah's writings. And the problem was that I was having more trouble because I thought I should be able to understand them, because I kind of had an education and I thought, well, I must know something. But I would read things and I'd think, and then I read Abdu'l-Baha and I can now understand certain things, because Abdu'l-Baha explained things to me that was easier for me to understand at that time. And then I learned after that Abdu'l-Baha had been referred to as the sheltering branch. And I thought, well, sheltering from what? And from the great rays and the sun of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. He protected me from all that so that I could just get the sunlight a little bit and the heat from it, and gradually I could walk out underneath the shade and see the full force of the revelation from Baha'u'llah. That was my understanding, and it still is, because I think Abdu'l-Baha's purpose was to somehow open up the doorway a little bit to Baha'u'llah's revelation, and then we could shut the door and open it up again a bit more, and then a bit more, and then finally get the full effulgence of the rays of Baha'u'llah's revelation. Well, then I could go back and read Baha'u'llah's writings, and I'd start to think, wow, this makes a lot more sense to me now. This I can understand better. Now the words of Baha'u'llah resonate in my heart and my mind, because the interpreter, Abdu'l-Baha, has explained things to me. So we could never, at least for me, never understand the revelation of Baha'u'llah without Abdu'l-Baha. Never. We would have been like the early Christians and the Jews and the Muslims, trying to understand the great holy books, but not having anyone to really explain what it meant. And so we could go to Abdu'l-Baha and read what he said, and then go back to the words of Baha'u'llah and say, oh, yes, now I understand. Now it makes much more sense to me. Now I'm not so confused about things. Now, it's not to mean that we don't read Baha'u'llah and feel the love and the fullness of everything, but I think it's more because we have understood things through what Abdu'l-Baha has said to us and done for us. He is the living example of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And for that, we can be so grateful to God and to Baha'u'llah that he gave us Abdu'l-Baha as this personage that we could turn to. Now, friends, I say this because, when Abdu'l-Baha came to North America, and as I'm sure we would have imagined, the Baha'is in those days, and probably in all days, have really would confuse things about, there's some Baha'is that probably thought, well, the teachings of Baha'u'llah are just wonderful, and why do we need any kind of an administration to sort of, let's live a good holy life and be nice people to each other and so forth. But you see, Abdu'l-Baha did more than that. He talked about the spiritual assemblies. He talked about the building of the administration of the Baha'i Faith. And he kind of opened up that whole concept that the revelation of Baha'u'llah would not just be about behaving nicely to each other, but learning how to do it collectively, how to do it as a society of people, what it would look like, not just have 10 good people in a room, but 10 good people learning how to do things together in a room, and now in a community, and then in a society, and then in a world. And so when the revelation of Baha'u'llah came, it wasn't just to turn us into nice people. It was to turn us into people who could do nice things nicely, that we would be able to not just be good, but good at something, good at building a civilization. So we would carry the attributes that Jesus Christ brought and that the Prophet Muhammad talked about in terms of society building and nation building. And we would start to translate that into world building. How do you build a world that is divided and learn how to not tear down barriers, but let them melt away and construct a new society in a way that we've never imagined before? So when I became a Baha'i a number of years ago, the Baha'i community was quite different. And I'm so excited that I became a Baha'i when I did, and I can look back and see where I have come from. I can't imagine what it's going to look like in the future, because that would be vain imagining. but I can't imagine it's not going to get better, because it's been getting better ever since I became a Baha'i. That seems to be the trajectory, that we're going to become better at things, applying the revelation of Baha'u'llah in ways that we could never have imagined 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we will be walking more in the footsteps of Abdu'l-Baha, because we will be trying to carry out the vision of that faith as Abdu'l-Baha attempted to articulate. I don't mean attempted, but he articulated, and we attempted to understand it, if I can put it that way. Little by little, we're looking more and more about how Abdu'l-Baha explained things to the peoples of the world and to those of us who are Baha'is. I wanted to just ask you to consider something that's come. I was speaking to some of the youth last week, and I've read this quote from a person named of Antoine Lavoisier. Now, Lavoisier, for those of you that love chemistry, and maybe there's one or two of you in the room here, he was a chemist living in the 1700s. And you're going to say, well, why am I bringing this up? Well, I'm bringing it up because he said something pretty profound, and it's been something profoundly said in every generation, but I think it's really something that we find in the teachings of Baha'u'llah very clearly. But Lavoisier said this: the human mind gets creased into a way of seeing things. Those who have envisioned nature according to a certain point of view during much of their career rise only with difficulty to new ideas. It is the passage of time, therefore, which must confirm or destroy the opinions I have presented. Okay. Now, think of what this guy was saying in the 1700s. Look, I think it was a bit arrogant, because, he had some great ideas about chemistry. And he was basically saying to people, look, you got to change your mind about this, because I'm right. I mean, but he was right. That's the problem, or the good thing. But he indicated an interesting idea. We do get creased in the way of seeing things. Like when people will say, well, the world will never change because people are people. Well, yes, we are people. That's why we're going to change, because the whole purpose of education, which we believe in, I hope, is to change what we believe and change what we do, or we wouldn't get educated. Why would you go to school if you didn't believe in education? So when people say that people are people, what you're saying is that, well, we'll always be beating each other up. And I'm saying, well, maybe that's the case for a while longer, but we're learning to find out that hurting each other doesn't feel so good. And maybe we could try something different. And I'm thinking that Abdu'l-Baha was saying this to us as well, that when he came to North America and the people were there, they all liked the idea of the earth as one country and mankind as citizens, but they probably had no idea what that meant. Like, it just was an idea. It was something that was brilliant. But was it 1968, we lifted off the planet Earth, we went to the moon, and halfway there, someone took a picture of the planet Earth. And lo and behold, there it was. The Earth was one country. I mean, there weren't little lines dividing up the United States and Canada, and Alaska was over here, and Siberia was over here. I mean, no, it was like one world. And Baha'u'llah had mentioned this like 100 years before, and everyone was saying, well, it's a good idea. But no, it's real. It's a real thing. So when the mind gets creased in the way of seeing things, we're still seeing the world full of countries. But what if they melted it down? What if it changed? What if something happened, which Baha'u'llah envisioned, that we would have a different kind of an arrangement? Maybe there will still be countries, but they won't be sort of political units to be fighting with each other. Maybe there'll be areas of complementarity that will be serving each other. I don't know what it'll look like, but I imagine from what Baha'u'llah's revelation is talking about, it'll be very different than it is now. I mean, this pandemic, for whatever it's worth it is, which has been terrible, has made us realize that a little virus can really drop us to our knees. And we're now one world, and we have one vaccine or two or three vaccines, all based on basically the same principle. And we're kind of learning that protects us. So, and we're all human. And somehow it must be a little bit sobering to think that, well, people in India die with COVID just like they die in Canada, just they die in Russia. I mean, there is no difference. It's the same virus. It's the same world. So I'm thinking that Baha'is are getting it. Like we're maybe starting to understand we're living in one world. And I'm not suggesting there's other people that don't believe the same things. Of course, how could they not? Baha'u'llah said it's true. So when Abdu'l-Baha came to North America, he reiterated time and time and time again to these wonderful early Baha'is. He would say things like, there is one human family, and there is one religion, and women and men are equal. And then he would go to another talk and give the same talk again. And it would seem to me he kept repeating this because he knew we didn't quite get it, or he knew we wanted to hear it again because we liked to hear it. I don't know what the reason was, but for time and time again, these writings of Abdu'l-Baha in this beautiful book, and then all of those beautiful talks and promulgation of universal peace are basically telling us the fundamentals of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And if you have an opportunity ever to read some of the talks that he gave in a promulgation of universal peace, which is that collection of those beautiful talks of those 239 days he was in North America, you will see he was just guiding us along to what his father had taught, what Baha'u'llah had brought to the world. And he was helping the friends in North America get it. He was trying to establish in their hearts and minds a change of thinking, a change of understanding. And then he left. And then for some time, it took a while for it to get rooted down. And finally, there was evidence that the faith was growing and growing in North America. And to this day, we're part of that growth. Now, folks, what I thought I would like to do is share with you a couple of other little ideas that came from Abdu'l-Baha. And I say this in a way because I'm also thinking that when you read Abdu'l-Baha, things were serious with what he said, but there was a joy in what he did. And he would refer to the fact that even being in prison was a joy. Like he just could change our thinking about hardship. And he could change our thinking about so many things. And he was the master. He was the exemplar of the faith. And he was the son of Baha'u'llah. So let me read to you something that I shared with some of the youth last week. Some of us as Baha'is would know the name Lua Getzinger. She was this one of these incredible women Baha'is in the early days of the faith. And her husband, Dr. Getzinger, was meeting once with Abdu'l-Baha. And this was in 1915 or so. And it was published in a beautiful little, probably newsletter, which we would have copies of, called The Star of the West. So this was really early on. It's not the Baha'i World volumes. This was called The Star of the West. And Abdu'l-Baha was meeting with Dr. Getzinger, and Dr. Getzinger obviously had a lot of questions that he was asking Abdu'l-Baha. And these are some of the answers, and I wanted to share this with you. What he said to Dr. Getzinger, which from my position really infected my life when I read these. And this is what he said to Dr. Getzinger. He said, "To be approved of God alone should be one's aim." Then he went and said, "Many times seeking the approval of man imperils the approval of God." Now think about this. We live in a world where people are often seeking the approval of other people, right? This is our culture. And Abdu'l-Baha said to Dr. Getzinger, to be approved of God alone should be one's aim. It's not to seek other people's approval. I mean, it's not to seek their disapproval either. I mean, I'm not suggesting we should do things to seek their disapproval. But oftentimes in our world that we live in, we're looking for other people to say how great we are. But what if we're not so great in the eyes of God? Like, I mean, Abdu'l-Baha is saying to Dr. Getzinger, to be approved of God alone should be one's aim. So one could only know, I suppose, and you look in the heart of your hearts to think, is my behavior, are my actions acceptable to God? Or am I just doing this to get approval of other people? And so Abdu'l-Baha said, well, here's the answer. To be approved of God alone should be one's aim. Many times seeking the approval of God, seeking the approval of man imperils the approval of God. And then he talked to Dr. Getzinger about the flexibility of the Baha'i Faith. And I wanted to read this quote to you because, you know, there are those of us that like rules and regulations and those of us that don't like anything. And I mean, we're a world community of 7.4 billion people. So you got to imagine the world as they come into the faith of Baha'u'llah. We're going to have a real diversity of people, right? Of course, that's what you're going to expect. So if the faith of Baha'u'llah is going to be useful to the world, then it has to find a way to touch the heart of every human being, not just you and me because we like the oneness of mankind or something. I don't know. It has to be able to resonate in the heart of a collective world of 7.4 or 5 billion, however many people there are in the world tonight. It's probably going to change by tomorrow, but you know what I'm getting at. So Abdu'l-Baha said this. He says to Dr. Getzinger, he said, we're not the revelation of Baha'u'llah, one adaptable to the entire world and its diverse nations. It could not be a unique and universal revelation. But its elasticity adapts itself to all conditions. And its spirit is one that molds itself into every vehicle and need for the accomplishment of the divine plan of unity. Isn't that extraordinary? So when you think about it, if you feel uncomfortable, maybe it's because you're not allowing the elasticity of the revelation to penetrate you. Maybe you're rigid. I don't know. I'm just bringing this up because, you know, if you're going to accommodate 7.4 billion people, you're probably going to have a lot of different people than you that are going to be Baha'is. And they have just as much of a right to this revelation as you do. You know what I'm saying here? Like it's so exciting to think that what's going on in the world now, when you see the opening of the house of worship in the South Pacific and the gathering of the people of the island there, which I think some of you have seen more recently, it's wonderful to see the various tribes of people and various peoples coming together who for no reason in the world would have been friends. No, they would never have been. But Baha'u'llah has brought them together. And they have to accommodate each other and love each other and forgive each other and whatever else you have to do to become a world citizen. But you see, Baha'u'llah didn't come just to choose people that liked what he said. He came to choose people who didn't like what he said and make them like him. You see, he came for the whole world. I mean, I have to tell you, folks, and I'll just tell you a very personal thing here. Mame has heard this, and maybe some of you have heard before. Mame and I became Baha'is in 4 days. We'd heard about the faith and enrolled 4 days later. And then we wanted to figure out what we were, because, you know, if you'd been something and became something in about 80 hours, what were you really? I couldn't hardly say the word Baha'u'llah. I had no idea what was going on, but it all felt right. And it's felt even righter since then. But at that moment, it felt really great. But anyway, I remember going to my very first Baha'i feast. And I was thinking now, okay, I'm a world citizen now, and I love the world. And, you know, I'd read Paris Talks, and I loved Abdu'l-Baha because I could really understand what he was saying. And he just spoke to me because I love that. And so I go to the first feast, and the week before that, I'd gone to church, and people were saying prayers in English. And then I go to this feast, and there's a prayer in English. And then the next prayer, someone's saying a prayer in French. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's kind of interesting. Honestly, I had never heard a French prayer, ever. And then it got more interesting because then there was a German prayer. And then it got even worse because then there was a Persian chant. And by then, I'm just thinking to myself, I don't like anybody here. Like I just realized I wasn't a world citizen at all. I didn't like anybody because it was I had so much prejudice at that moment. And then I'm thinking, well, I became a Baha'i because I don't like anybody. Like, I mean, you see, when Baha'u'llah said to you, the earth is one country and mankind is citizens, you are all the one family. And then all of a sudden you don't like anybody in the family. Then you have to look at yourself and say, well, what am I doing in this Baha'i faith thing? You know, like what's going on here? And I think Abdu'l-Baha just loved us because he knew the struggles we went through. Like he couldn't come to North America and look at all these, and some of them were fairly wealthy Baha'is, right? They were kind of upper class. And he would tell them, you know, well, there's a little bit of a rude awakening going to come here because the world isn't going to be like all like you know, it's going to be really. So he went to the Bowery and he spoke in the synagogues and in the churches, and he showed the people what the revelation of Baha'i was about. And I would go back to Abdu'l-Baha's writings and I would start to think, okay, well, I've got to get over this problem because, you know, I am a Baha'i and I've got to start to like people praying in different languages. But you see, the point was, this is not a confession because I don't expect anyone to forgive me for this, but I'm just telling you that when Baha'u'llah came to change the world, he didn't come to leave it the way it was. We were all going to have to step forward and move, right? And we were going to have to follow that example of Abdu'l-Baha. And he was the world citizen. Abdu'l-Baha was the example. And we're just kind of like, I'm just trailing along. I hate this image, but the only one I can think of is the mother duck and all the little ducklings walking behind and falling over all the time. And the mother is looking around and helping them get along the way. And I'm thinking, well, that's not a good way to think of Abdu'l-Baha, but that's how I feel about it sometimes, that there was this example, this personage that's gone ahead, and he's calling us to follow him. And we fall over and we make mistakes, and he picks us up and takes us along. Anyway, I just leave you that, but I wanted to read you one other little thing here to Dr. Getzinger. And this is one of the first comments he made in this little list of things. He says, no obstacle should be placed before any soul which might prevent it from finding the truth. Baha'u'llah revealed his directions, teachings, and laws so that souls might know God and not that any utterance might become an obstacle in their way. Isn't that interesting? So I'm also thinking, like when I was talking to some youth last week, I said, well, when people ask you, what is a Baha'i and what does the Baha'i Faith teach? Well, I'm sort of thinking to myself, I could say a number of things about what the Baha'i Faith is. And they did, and they're wonderful youth, and boy, they sure know a lot of things. But then I'm thinking to myself, if I were to ask Abdu'l-Baha that question, what would he say? What is the Baha'i Faith? And I'm thinking what Abdu'l-Baha would do, and again, I can't tell you this categorically, but from all the things he wrote to people, it seems to me he answered questions. So maybe he would say, or I would say to someone who wants to know about the Baha'i Faith, what would you like to know? And they say, well, because you see, I might say, well, we believe in the oneness of mankind, but what if this person doesn't want to even know that? What if they want to know, do you believe in life after death? You see, like I could be giving them my answer to what I like a lot, but they don't want to hear that. They want to hear, but so their only way of asking the question is, what is the Baha'i Faith? So that's the question. But what they're really saying is, do you believe in life after death? Or what do you think about kids? Or I don't know. They have a whole lot of questions, but they don't know how to articulate it. So think about this. He wrote a whole book called Some Answered Questions, right? And Lady Bloomfield had a lot of questions. She kept firing them and he kept answering them. And our whole faith is a faith of questions, right? We have a whole month called the Month of Questions. So we should never feel that we don't want to ask questions. And then we have the responsibility maybe then to try to be able to give the best answer and just simply say, well, this is my provisional understanding of your question and my answer, because your answers will grow as you grow in your knowledge of the faith of Baha'u'llah. So all I'm suggesting from this, the thing about no obstacle should be placed in front of anybody which might prevent them from finding the truth. I think we just want to make sure that we're trying to answer questions of hearts that are trying to understand things, just like we are. And that those questions and those answers could be mellow, or they could be hard, or they could be soft, and they could be sweet. I mean, we need to find a way to help that soul connect with its beloved, with Baha'u'llah. And I always think of Abdu'l-Baha as being that bridge from my heart to Baha'u'llah. That how I would connect with the Blessed Perfection would be through Abdu'l-Baha. And that's what he's done for the world and will continue forever to do for the world. So when he says, look at me, follow me, be as I am, he's leading me towards Baha'u'llah. And he's leading me not just to the personage of Baha'u'llah, but to the vision of Baha'u'llah's revelation and to all those things that he has brought to the world. Now, folks, I think what I'd like to do is just a little bit for an ending here. There is these beautiful selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha. There's another quote here that I wanted to read to you, and if I can do that and just maybe sort of summarize things for you at the end. Again, if you haven't had an opportunity to read some of these selections from the writings, well, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tonight, and then you can forget it. They're pretty good things to read, because it really helps you, I think, because of the greatness of the revelation. We can't possibly know nearly enough, but we can certainly read what Abdu'l-Baha's contribution was to the Friends in North America and see how that shapes our vision of things. And then we go back and then we look at the messages of the House of Justice, and we see what the beloved guardian wrote, Shoghi Effendi, and all of it starts to come, I think, together in a magnificent sort of painting of a display of what Baha'u'llah is bringing to the world. But listen, this is what Abdu'l-Baha said in another one of his letters. He said, "O ye respected souls." So he was writing, I guess, to a few of the friends again in North America. He says, out of this pitch blackness, which is, I guess, the world that he saw there dawned the morning splendor of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He hath dressed the world with a new garment, new and fair. And that new garment is the principles which have come down from God. Okay. Then he goes on to say this, and some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. Says, now the new age is here, and creation is reborn. Humanity has taken on new life. The autumn has gone by, and the reviving spring is here. All things are now made new. Arts and industries have been reborn. There are new discoveries in science. There are new inventions, and even the details of human affairs, such as dress and personal effects, even weapons, he said. All these have been renewed. The laws and procedures of every government have been revised. Renewal is the order of the day. That's what he says. And then he goes on to say that, and all this newness hath its source in the fresh outpourings of wondrous grace and favor from the Lord of the kingdom. So that's where the newness is coming from. It's not because some politician or academic or somebody thought it up, this is what we're going to do to make a different world. He says all this newness has its source in the fresh outpourings of wondrous grace and favor from the Lord of the kingdom, which have renewed the world. The people, then he says, must set completely free from their old patterns of thought. Do you have old patterns of thought? Yeah. He says you got to set them free. Think about what they are. That's all I'm saying. I have to every day. What do I think about this? Oh, I don't like that. He says you must set yourself completely free from that. that all their attention, he says, may be focused upon these new principles, for these are the light of this time and the very spirit of this age. Unless these teachings are effectively spread amongst the people, until the old ways, the old concepts are gone and forgotten, the world of being will find no peace, nor will it reflect the perfection of the heavenly kingdom. Then he said this, strive ye with all your hearts to make the heedless conscious, to waken those who sleep, to bring knowledge to the ignorant, to make the blind to see, the deaf to hear, and restore the dead to life. It behooveth you to show forth such power, such endurance, as to astonish all beholders. This confirmation of the kingdom are with you. Upon you be the glory of the all-glorious. So when I read this, I mean, I just get so excited about it because I'm thinking that everything we're witnessing in the world today, the unfolding of things, the breaking down of things, the issue that the world's coming together for dealing with even difficult things like climate change, we're really having to come together as a world, right? It's a struggle. And there's politics involved, and there's ego involved, and all these things are involved, but it's kind of we're knocking our heads together. We're having to do this. And the more we just accept the reality that we are one world and we have a responsibility to take care of this world together, then the easier it's going to be. But it's inevitable. We have to do it. You see, it's the will of God. It's what has to happen. And the longer we postpone it, the more suffering we go through. I can't explain, I can't obviously express this anymore. I'm sure all the women here who have ever delivered a baby know that at some point, as you're going through labor, you'll wish it would be over. But at the same time, you know that at the end of the labor will be this wonderful prize, which is this little baby. And I think we're going through collective labor, and it's painful. And we could mitigate it if we would just push harder. I don't know. I never delivered a baby, but it seems to me that pushing has to do a lot with delivering the baby. And the natural process of going through it and the pain and suffering and the learning and all of that is part of it, for sure. And I think what Abdu'l-Baha was suggesting to us that in large measure, we could have avoided such things like the Great World War in 1914. We could have mitigated a Second World War. All of these things could have happened, as we know, if the leaders of the world had responded to Baha'u'llah's messages to the kings and to the so forth. But they didn't, they chose not to. So we're now faced with having to deal with a lesser peace, the difficulty that we all have to go through to resolve human suffering. That will take a lot more effort on our part and a lot more suffering on our part. But as we find in the revelation of Baha'u'llah, you know, there's no easy way to do this now. We find that we have to go from A to B and B to C and C to D, and we need to have confidence in the power of Baha'u'llah to assist us in doing this. And all of the messages of Abdu'l-Baha and everything that he did do was to bring us to a knowledge of the role of Baha'u'llah in unfolding the civilization that he's bringing to us, the civilization that God wants for this world. Now, friends, I'll just end with you with one other little message, and that is this. You know, he spent 239 days in North America, and some of you I know far more about this than I could ever imagine. And you've read some of the messages and what he said when he was in various talks. You've read the book 339 Days. You've read Promulgation of Universal Peace. You've done a lot of things, and you know these things. And we're so blessed as Baha'is to be here this year in the year of the covenant, really, the 100th anniversary of the passing of the Blessed Master. And the final day that will come up will be the day of his passing, but also the day of the covenant. Of course, he didn't want his birthday celebrated because that was the same day as the declaration of the Bab. May 23rd, 1844, the Bab declared and Abdu'l-Baha was born. The very vessel that the revelation would fill itself in was born the very night that Bob declared his mission. It's an extraordinary arrangement when you think about it. The Bob and Abdu'l-Baha were connected that very night with his birth and the birth of a new revelation. Well, friends, when he left America on the boat, the Celtic, I'll just paraphrase a couple of things that he said as he was standing on the boat speaking to the friends. And of course, a number of them were women on the shore waving at him as he was on the ship. And other friends that were there, they sure didn't want him to go, but they knew he had to. So he said, "This is my last meeting with you, for now I am on the ship ready to sail away. And these are my final words of exhortation." Said, "I've repeatedly summoned you to the cause of the unity of the world." So he said, "I have repeatedly done this, announcing that all mankind are the servants of the same God." There's not many gods, there's the same God. All mankind are the servants of the same God, that God is the creator of all. He is the provider and the life giver. All are equally beloved by him. All are his servants upon whom his mercy and compassion descend. Therefore, you must manifest the greatest kindness and love towards the nations of the world, setting aside fanaticism, abandoning religious, national, and racial prejudice. Okay. The earth is one nativity, one home, and all mankind are the children of one Father. God has created them, and they are the recipients of his compassion. Therefore, if anyone offends another, he offends God. It is the wish of our Heavenly Father that every heart should rejoice and be filled with happiness, that we should live together in felicity and joy. The obstacle to human happiness is racial or religious prejudice, the competitive struggle for existence, and the inhumanity toward each other. Beware lest you offend any heart, he said, lest you speak against anyone in his absence. So I'll just go on and I'll just read to you how he summarized his last words. He says, "Consider the heedlessness of the world, for notwithstanding the efforts and suffering of the prophets of God, the nations and peoples are still engaged in hostility and fighting." So he said to it, in spite of what they did, look what we have done. In spite of Jesus and Muhammad, in spite of Moses and the Buddha and Krishna, this is what we have done. It's not that God hasn't given us everything. We just have not accepted it. He says, consider the heedlessness of the world. For notwithstanding the efforts and suffering of the prophets of God, the nations and peoples are still engaged. Notwithstanding the heavenly commandments of love, to love one another, they are still shedding each other's blood. Although they are the children of a compassionate God, they continue to live and act in opposition to his will and good pleasure. So he's really nailing us here. Like he's really saying to these people, the last minute he's on the boat, look what we've done to the world. In spite of God's love, we have just rejected it, you see? And he says, your duty is of another kind. Now he's looking at the Baha'is and he says, for you're informed of the mysteries of God. So you can't say you don't know what to do. And I've spent 239 days telling you, he's really coming across to me. He's really saying this a lot. He says, your eyes are illumined, your ears are quickened with hearing. You must therefore look toward each other and then towards mankind with the utmost love and kindness. Now, folks, that means everybody, every country of the world. Every people, no matter what we see on television and we hear in the news, we have to love the world and the peoples in it, in spite of the governments and even the people. We just have to put aside all of our prejudices and realize that the construction of the world now is because we've been heedless to the messengers of God. So we have to show a different response to this world and all the things that are going on to it that are so bad. He said, You must therefore look toward each other and towards mankind with the utmost love and kindness. Okay? You have no excuse to bring before God if you fail to live according to his commandments, for you are informed of what constitutes the good pleasure of God. Wow. I mean, well, you can't say, I don't know. No, he says, you do know. You may not act on it, but you sure know. You see, that's what I understand Abdu'l-Baha was saying to me and to us. We know exactly how to behave. We may not do it, but we can't say we don't know. So then he goes on to say this. You must therefore be kind to all men. You must consider your evil wishers your well wishers, and all the things that for us and for me are so difficult. But he says, this is what you got to do. Those who are not agreeable toward you must be regarded as those who are congenial and pleasant. Wow, that's a difficult one. But this is what Abdu'l-Baha said. So that perchance this darkness of disagreement and conflict may disappear from amongst men, and the light of the divine may shine forth, he said. It's my hope that you may become successful in this high calling, so that like brilliant lamps, you may cast light upon the world of humanity and quicken and stir the body of existence like unto a spirit of life. This is eternal glory, he said. This is eternal. This is everlasting felicity. This is immortal life. This is heavenly attainment. This is being created in the image and the likeness of God. And then he said, and unto this I call you, praying to God to strengthen and bless you. And then Abdu'l-Baha was gone. Now, I just wanted to read that to you. That you can find this if you want in the book called Abdu'l-Baha. I think it's by Terzadeh. It's the last section in it. And it's also, I'm sure you can find it in Baha'i.org if you look it up, Abdu'l-Baha's farewell speech. It's a beautiful summary, if I can put it that way, of all we should know and strive to be. So, folks, I hope that's been helpful. It's been sure helpful for me to review these things because I don't think we can ever not review constantly what Abdu'l-Baha has done and is doing for us continually. He said we should pray for his demise. I'm just paraphrasing because he said if you knew what would happen after we left, you would want me gone sooner. I read that, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but boldly. Since Abdu'l-Baha is gone, we've had Shoghi Effendi, we've had the House of Justice, we've had the Administrative Order, Hands of the Cause of God, counselors, board members, friends, institutes, God, local assemblies. Can you imagine what we've had and we have? It's a miracle. It's really a miracle. So I would never have hoped for Abdu'l-Baha to leave ever, but we knew he would. But he said, if you could have imagined what it would be like after I'm gone, you would pray for my demise sooner. I'm hoping no one did, but that's what Abdu'l-Baha said to us. So. Well, folks, thank you so much for letting me share these ideas with you. This is an extraordinarily wonderful faith, as we know, and we're all learners, aren't we? We're trying to understand this faith so much, and we can best understand it by sharing with each other and learning together, because no one has it better than Abdu'l-Baha, and none of us can imagine understanding all the greatness of the revelation the way Abdu'l-Baha has explained it to us, but we can talk about it. We can share it with each other, with our friends and our neighbors and our children and each other, and become excited. Look forward to the day of the covenant coming up and the commemoration of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha. Because without his ascension, we wouldn't have had a beloved guardian. When we think about that, we wouldn't have had many things. So there's always a blessing in sorrow. Always they go together. Crisis and victory is kind of the sine wave of our faith, crisis and victory, and it goes up and down like that. It's very beautiful. So thank you for letting me do this tonight, and hope you're all well and happy and COVID-free and all those things. Thank you. Good.
Yes. Wonderful. Dave, I see a lot of hearts popping up and clapping hands and happy faces. So on behalf of everyone in the gathering here, I want to thank you for taking the time and always inspiring us, Dave. For those of us who have had the bounty of listening to you before, it's just such a pleasure. It's become something that we all love is hearing you speak. You get into a mode and we know that you're in a way just kind of channeling what's coming to your heart. So it's really special. I was very interested to hear you say how every year there's more and more in the Baha'i community. It seems like things are just getting better and better. And I'm reading a book right now called Decline, and it's talking about how every year is the worst year ever. And I love that contrast. And that's why I love, having been introduced to this wonderful family and this wonderful family here at the Baha'i community. And it's just such a wonderful perspective to have.
Well, some of us, when I was able to serve and had the blessing of serving as a counselor for so many years, I just wanted to share with you. I know some of you have heard these stories on a number of occasions, but my understanding is that the young people of the world understand things conceptually quicker, and I not mean they're smarter, but sometimes they don't have the same prejudices because they haven't had so long to have them ingrained. So they capture these ideas much more quickly because they're younger and they haven't had a chance of learning such bad things for such a long time. But anyway, so the future of the world, I think, is extraordinary with the youth that I see around. In spite of the youth that seem to have problems and so forth, their hearts really want a better world. And we have an obligation as a Baha'i community to sort of welcome youth into the faith and have them take their rightful role in bringing the faith forward. But I wanted to just share with you this as an example because Naim and I think Naim is on here somewhere in the other room. We were at the first conference of the Baha'is in Moscow in 1991 or two. I guess it was 91 because it was the year before the Holy Year. And there was a number of counselors there, and one of the counselors that was serving with me at the time is now a member of the House of Justice, Mr. Stephen Birkeland. And Stephen and I are just longtime friends. I just love the guy. But we were there, and it was late one night, and it was great, and it was the best time because the youth are always up late, and I'm a night person anyway. Much to Maim's concern because she's a morning person. That people like that get along. No, we get along well. She's great in the morning. I'm great at night and so forth. Well, anyway, you get my drift. Well, we were up late one night with the youth in Russia, and there was a whole group of youth sitting there, and Stephen Birkeland was there, and a few other counselors and members of the National Assembly of Germany and so forth. It was just an amazing night, and we were sitting there, and this one youth turns up and looks at us and said, Shoghi Effendi said, and I'm going to terribly rephrase this again. He says, all we can reasonably attempt to is to get a glimpse of the first streams of the promised dawn, which must in the fullness of time, so forth. He quoted exactly what I tried to say earlier tonight. And I said to this guy, I said, how long have you been a Baha'i? And he said, 3 months. And I said, how do you know this Shoghi Effendi? How come you know him? And he said, Shoghi Effendi, now listen to this about placing any obstacle in front of someone. He says, Shoghi Effendi is the best political scientist I ever read. Okay, now listen, this is very interesting because this guy grew up in a Marxist society. And when he thinks Shoghi Effendi is better than Marx, this is important because that's how he related to the revelation of Baha'u'llah. He saw the revelation through the Guardian, and he understood this incredible faith because of the way the Guardian analyzed it. You see how magnificent the faith is? Well, I said, wow, that's amazing. He said, yes. He says, the good thing about communism, it made us read. So I learned from then that the Russian youth really read a lot. Well, a few years later, I'm in Haifa, and there's an election of the House of Justice going on, and I'm a counselor at the time. And I noticed they call for the members of the National Assembly of the Russian Federation. And there's Sergei, the same guy. It was 24 or 5 sitting there that night in Russia 5 years earlier. He's on the National Assembly of Russia. Now, friends, I can't tell you how exciting this is, because here is a guy that grew up in a communist society molded by Marx and Lenin and all this stuff. And he saw the beauty of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And he filtered out all of this Marxist stuff, and he saw Shoghi Effendi, and he understood the revelation through the eyes of the Guardian, you see. And then he would have gone back and seen Abdu'l-Baha. So all I'm suggesting is when we teach the faith of Baha'u'llah to people, you don't know where they're coming from. And you have to be prepared to open any door that will let them into the faith. You know what I'm saying? That because they all have had different experiences. In China, for example, where Mame and I have been on many occasions, people will become Baha'is and say, this is good for China. Like they're understanding, it is good for China. I just wish there were more Baha'is there. It would be a lot better for China. But the point is that the relationship they have with the faith would be to how does this better the people, the community I'm living in? They don't think about it for themselves personally. They don't say, I'm a Baha'i, this is good for me. They'll say, I'm a Baha'i, this is good for China. This is good for the world. Now, me, when I became a Baha'i, said, this is good for me. Well, it is good for me, but we have to get beyond the me and realize about the we. This is the world religion. This is not just about and Rahia Khanum said, this is not about personal salvation. It's about social redemption. It's about the change of a world. And within that change, you and I will be changed. There's no question. If we allow ourselves to be changed. And I think that's the other part of the equation. But it's destined to change us. That's the thing. We affect the social society, and the social society affects us. And it's this little bit of back and forth. The more we start to influence the thinking, the more the thinking will be influenced and restructure and reshape things. So we have a great role to play.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dave. If you have a little more time, perhaps we can squeeze in a few questions. Are you up for it, Dave?
Sure, maybe, because I don't want to go too late here, because then we'll zoom off. But sure, a couple of questions would be fine.
Okay, there's a lot of us here on the call. So if you would like to use the raise hand function, I'll be able to see you, which is down in the reactions ribbon at the bottom. If you would like to raise a hand, or you could put a question in the chat and I'll try to monitor that. So go ahead if anyone has a question for Dave. Could be about Groundhog Day or anything he's spoken about since I mentioned his favorite holiday, not holy day. I didn't say holy day, I said holiday. Oh, Mame's birthday comes first.
Very
all right.
Thing.
Shala, you go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, I have known David for eternity. I don't know if he remembers coming to Montreal. So I'm going to make a little story, tell a story, and then ask him how he would react today, because he had a reaction at that time. I think about the end of 1980, beginning of 1990, he came to Montreal to speak to the youth. And he talked to the youth about education and suggested that they go into education. Of course, there were many Baha'i parents at the time. They were trying to promote medicine, engineering, and law. And sort of they were wondering, what was David Smith, the counselor, talking about? And as it happened, both our kids and many of their friends went into education. And we are really pleased now that they did, because we realized that there was necessity for both young men and young women to go into education. Now, if you were giving that talk today to the youth, what would you say to the youth that they should study? And what do you think would be the thing that would take them into the next stage of life?
Well, that's a great question. And I probably would I want to ask you to just consider this. If you read the first 2 pages of The Secret of Divine Civilization, which I'm sure many of you have done, you will find that Abdu'l-Baha talks about the intellect and how it is a God-given, this is the foremost gift that God is given to us, as our intellect. And so therefore, we need to use our intellect in the best way possible for the service of humankind. Education, actually, if you've seen the new film that's come out on the exemplar, there's a lot of emphasis in there about the farmer. And so I wouldn't suggest everyone becomes a farmer today, but I'm suggesting that we need to realize that all of our energies need to go into where our heart takes us to be of service to humankind, whether it's informal things like education or things like engineering or medicine or any services that we can be rendering. It's an incredible thing that our heart should be engaged in what we're doing. I think that's what's most important. Where I got into some trouble, and I'll just share this with all of you, some of you I think I've seen on the screen there might remember this years ago. I was quite vocal, and I still am, about youth leaving North America sometime and doing something in another country, only because, and my wife will attest to this, we're always concerned, and I'm always concerned about the materialism of North America and how it just it embraces people and shapes their thinking sometimes, and they're not freed up then to make what I would even think rational decisions about their future. Okay, I'm pretty vocal about this, but so I would encourage youth to consider leaving North America for a period of service. Now, I mean, look, and so some of the parents at that time, this was, thank God, a while ago, I think they wrote to the World, well, I know they wrote the World Center because they said, well, Dr. Smith is telling all our kids to leave. Well, I was not saying it exactly like that, but I was, yeah, I was, yes, I was saying you should leave, but talk to your parents first. Anyway, it was from my heart, though, I have to tell you. Well, anyway, the House of Justice wrote back this beautiful letter, and it basically said, well, the counselor was just trying to do his best. But they said, and this was important, they said that parents should not interpose themselves between the youth and God. Now, that is an interesting comment, because everything we do in the faith has to be between you and Baha'u'llah, right? I mean, it's the final arbiter is Baha'u'llah, and you have to be in that arrangement. So you have to respect your parents, totally. I mean, God gave you your parents, and they're there to help you and nurture and cultivate you and so forth. But in the final analysis, you can't always walk in the pathway your parents want you to go, because you have your own spiritual destiny to fulfill. So I will give you one other example of this. A number of years ago, I was out on the West Coast, and I went to one of the schools there, and one of the wonderful Persian men was driving me back to the airport. And he said, Dr. Smith, I have a problem. I said, well, I'm okay. What is it? He said, well, my daughter, which is a Persian daughter, of course, she wanted to go and do a period. She wanted to go and do a period of service in China. And she said, I'm a Persian father. I don't want her to go. And I said, well, what's going to happen? He said, well, I'll tell you what did happen. He said, my daughter decided to have a consultation with my wife and myself, and about what she wanted to do. And I said, as my father said to me, he said, I thought that when she did that, it would be wonderful, because my wife would say, oh, you can't go to China. You're my daughter. I'm worried about you. So anyway, so my daughter comes into the room, and my wife is there, and I'm sitting there in the room, and I'm sitting so happy because my wife's going to take the heat from me, and I don't have to work. So my daughter comes in and says, I want to go to China and teach English as a second language and teach the faith. And my wife said, that's terrific. And he said, oh, no, she's going to China. Well, she went to China, and she did her period of service and came home. What he was saying to me was this, I would have not wanted her to go. And thank God my wife did. And I'm thinking, a lot of times as parents, and I'm sure a parent and a grandparent and a great-grandparent, I like to think about what's good for my kids. And then I have to think back and stand back and say, maybe I should just pray a lot for them and kind of give them some guidance and love but they have their own spiritual destiny, right? And the history of the faith of Baha'u'llah is everyone acting on their destiny, right? They're what they have to do for Baha'u'llah. And we can't make those choices, I don't think. And if we do, I think we regret it. I mean, for other people. But we can encourage them, and we should consult together and pray together and find what that pathway of service is good for and so forth. So I don't know what I would say today, except that's been my experience since that time. I love education. But I love so many things, I think. And I just kind of love youth being excited about the world and doing great things and difficult things. I'll tell you one other story. I know the time's getting late, but one of my favorite people in the world is now in the other kingdom, the Abba kingdom, was Counselor Eloy Anello. I love that guy. And he pioneered once from California to Puerto Rico. And he was a young guy at the time, and he had a girlfriend in California. And when he went pioneered to California, to Puerto Rico, he said he was lying in like a hut with a tin roof. It was pouring rain on the tin roof. He had dengue fever. He was shivering and he was sweating. And his girlfriend by then had left him because he'd gone to Puerto Rico. And he was lying there and saying to himself, why am I doing this? Like I could be in Southern California on the beach. And why am I in the rain in Puerto Rico with dengue fever? And he said, oh yeah, now I remember, it's because of Baha'u'llah. Like, I mean, he connected this uncomfortable situation with Baha'u'llah. He was the sweetest guy, and he did the most marvelous things. And this one day, he ended up finally having to get his PhD in education because everywhere he went, he knew so much about community development. People called him Dr. Anello. And finally, the House of Justice said to him, you should get your doctorate because everyone's calling you one. So he went back to university and got his PhD. It actually took a few months off being a counselor. The House told him to do this, and he got his PhD. But he was telling us one day about the fact he was in this community development course in Puerto Rico and social development course. And on Friday, the professor had said, we're going to have a SNAP exam on Monday. And Eloy said, well, I promised the teaching team I would go on a teaching project that weekend. And so now I got an exam on Monday, and I promised to go on teaching. What do I do? Well, he decided to go. He made a promise that he would go on the teaching team. So he went to the teaching team. On Monday, they came back. He wrote the exam. And the Friday that week, the professor comes in with all the marks and is handing them out to the class and said, there's just one paper here that's just an extraordinary paper. I've never read answers and to the questions like I read. And this is for Mr. Anello, got a tremendous mark. And Eloy said to me, he said, the reason I got a good mark on that exam is that everything I knew about social development came from the Secret of Divine Civilization. And I wrote that. So, folks, if you want to know about the world and how to fix things, read the writings. And in this case, Secret of Divine Civilization is probably the best book on social and economic development that'll ever be written. It was written by the beloved master when he was young. He sent it to Persia, and he didn't sign it. He just sent it. And Baha'u'llah had asked him to do this, and he did it. And we have the privilege of reading this book. So I tell you that because Eli got a good mark. And I sure loved the guy. And when he died, you know, it was an interesting, because I phoned him about 3 weeks before he died. He had some cancer, and unfortunately wasn't able to recover from it. And I said, how are you, Eloy? He said, I'm physically lousy and spiritually great. Like he was, and I spoke once to Dr. Arbaugh, who was also a member of the House of Justice and knew Eloy very well. And I said, as far as I might really miss this guy, you know, he said, yeah, but he said, Eloy always had his feet in both worlds. He was like in this world and in the other world almost all the time. He just was one of those souls that kind of, I don't know, walked in both places. So I'm just trying to share you some pictures of people that I knew and people that loved Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian, and they just were in love with things like this, and they really moved my heart. And
I thought you were going to tell us to go and become farmers.
Well, I think when you see that beautiful presentation movie by the House of Justice, The Exemplar, you might get a hint about what to do with your life. I don't know. Okay, folks, that's probably enough. Is that right? So good to see you all. I wish I could all see you in person, but that'll happen one day, I'm sure. I hope.
This was wonderful hearing all your stories. Can I just ask before we say goodbye, Rihanna, you had your hand up. Was that a question you wanted to share? And we'll see if Dave could do a condensed version. Yeah.
Yeah, in a very brief, I just want to one clarification. I'm coming from India, and India is a multicultural, multi-religion place. And here, if out of way, if we emphasize only the exemplar, perfect exemplar is Abdu'l-Baha. But in our other religion also, like Islam, Imam Ali was a perfect exemplar. In Hindu culture also, Hanuman and many are there. So how to combine, I don't know. Please guide us.
Yeah, well, I think that's really important that you've brought that up. I think that maybe the difference is that Baha'u'llah himself appointed Abdu'l-Baha as the exemplar. It wasn't something that someone took on that role, nor even lived a holy life after, because Baha'u'llah appointed Abdu'l-Baha as the center of the covenant and as the exemplar. So although there have been extraordinarily many wonderful Baha'is, and there will be in the future, and there have been in the past, there would be no one like Abdu'l-Baha because of that direct appointment of his father. So I think that would be my best answer on that one. But it's not to say that in all the religions of the world, because they're all one religion, there have not been extraordinary holy people and people that are a great example. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I think I saw Naveed from Virginia. Are you still there? Somewhere. Naveed and I served together for quite a while. It was wonderful. Anyway, I just want to thank you.
A lot of wonderful faces here, and
yeah,
so I'll thank you again, Dave, on behalf of everyone here. I'm sure we could sit here all evening and hear your stories and ask questions. It's so enlightening, and we need it more than ever. I don't know, Dave and Mame, if you noticed your grandson here. He's been renamed Kips Lane. Rushing back from class to catch you.
Good. I'll test you on it later, Asher. I'm really hard on the grand guys. You know that. I love them. Okay, you guys. Thanks so much.
I might end it here and say thank you all. And before you go, just a reminder in case you didn't hear me at the beginning that this event takes place every Thursday. The last Thursday of the month is usually an open forum for devotions. We call it the Potluck Soul Cafe. But on the other Thursdays, it's usually a formally prepared talk. And it is geared towards friends who would like to explore concepts and teachings from the Baha'i Faith. So the link is always the same, and you're most welcome to invite your friends to join. So Firuz, at this point, I'll turn it over to our wonderful Mama Firuz.
I was just wondering if it would be possible for Brett to finish tonight, this beautiful evening, with a prayer and music, please.
He would be very happy. He's going to run and grab his guitar. As he does that, friends, I was asked a few times in the chat where the recordings are. It's actually a YouTube channel called Oakville Baha'is. So if you just type that into YouTube, you'll see this talk. Give it a day or two, and so it will be there.
Reem, thank you so much. Even though you're my daughter-in-law, you're still pretty great.
Even though.
Yeah, it's so good to see you guys.
We're waiting for Brett to come with his guitar, so I have a moment to say I met Eloy and Elo. I had some time serving with him in Bolivia, and he was telling me this story of how he had this vision, and Mullah Hussein was racing towards him on a horse, and he had his sword. And anyways, Eloy is crying as he's telling me this, and all I can think is, who's Mullah Hussein?
Yeah.
Why is he on a horse? He was so inspired.
He was an extraordinary guy. Oh, God.
One of the things Abdu'l-Baha loved to do is spend time with the impoverished and the destitute. And I think on day 3, when he arrived in New York City, he said, I need to go and see the poor. And one evening he spent the evening talking to about 400 people in the Bowery Mission, which is a part of Manhattan. And he talked to them and he loved them, and he ended up giving them the equivalent of about $40 each to 400 of them. And so anyways, this was a song that we wrote for that and for his love of the poor. And he called them that the poor are our trust. And so this is called The Trust Among Us. A fearless servant of the poor, this prisoner freer than us all, good ground made ready by the rain, and it pours down on him. He gave all he had away, easing up hunger and pain. He is everywhere. The world will never be the same, for his love remains with us. Abdu'l-Baha. He heard the crying of his trust, the midnight sighing of the poor, though weighted down and bound in chains, he clothed them in his love and gave all he had away, easing of hunger and pain. He is everywhere. The world will never be the same, for his love remains with us. Abdu'l-Baha.
Thank you, David, and good
Thank
night.
you so much. Take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Thank you,
A
Brett.
puppy here that wants to go out.
Bye, guys. Safe drive home.
Okay.
Brett, you have to just make sure that you're driving in a speed limit.
Yeah, I know. I'm not good at that. I'll try.
Night
That's
all.
what I remind you. That's what I reminded you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care of him. Bye now.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lovely evening. Yeah, sure.
I'd like to thank you also for this wonderful talk and the beautiful music.
Thank you.
In about an hour, I have my own devotional, so I'm going to go with Olive.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is Monir Munjazeb from Puslinch.
Ah, yes. How are you? Good to see you.
Fine, thank you. That was lovely to see Dr. Smith after a long time.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much.
How's Rafaela?
She's doing very well.
Excellent. Yes. Where is she now?
She's living in Brampton, but she's working with Sheridan College.
Oh,
okay.
Yes, and she has a very nice position because she knows 4 languages and she is responsible for the international students.
Oh, wow. Great.
Canada.
Perfect. Does she work in the Oakville, Sheridan, or Mississauga?
No, she's working at home.
Oh, okay, but is her campus the 3 campuses, or
it was in Oakville.
Oh, okay. Oh, you'll please say hello for us.
Sure. I remember that in those days you were her teacher for the Baha'i classes.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you so much.
Those were good days. She is such a bright student. You know, you can see the light in her and the enthusiasm. It's so funny because I was thinking of her today or yesterday because she did her co-op at our school. So she came and worked with us part-time for a couple of months. And I remember thinking how bright she was. And anyway, our youngest son is in co-op now. And so it made me think of Rafaela and how enthusiastic she was. And so I just had her on my mind.
In Guelph, from Guelph University. And then for her master, she went to McMaster University.
Okay. So the co-op she did with us was still in high school. Yeah, she was still in high school. So she was young, but very bright. I could tell.
Yeah.
And you're doing well, Mrs. Munjazeb. You're keeping well. You look well.
Yes. It was hard after Saï passed away, but I try my best. I'm happy that I'm in Puslinch community and they are so nice and I feel I am between my brothers and sisters.
Wonderful.
Yes, that's lovely to be in this community.
You know,
are you in Guelph now?
We are in Oakville.
Oh, you are in Oakville. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Wish you all the best. That was lovely to see you and Dr. Smith as well. I enjoyed it a lot.
Lovely to see you. So give our love to Rafaela when you talk to her, please.
I will. Thank you so much.
Nice to see you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.